and welcome to Cinema Wellman. I'm your host, David, and today we're going to celebrate some of the greatest composers in film history, which is why I'm dressed like this, unless your table at Applebee's is ready. We here at Cinema Wellman love movies and movie music, and we know how important music can be to a film. So this is our fourth episode dealing with movie music while others are in the planning stages. Before we begin, a quick reminder as to the difference between a movie soundtrack and a movie score. The soundtrack of a movie is all of the sound. It's all of it. It's dialogue, it's the songs, it's the sound effects, it's the Foley effects, and the score. That's all part of the soundtrack. The score is the original music written specifically to accompany a film. It's music composed for the film by a composer. The film's score is non-diegetic sound. It cannot be heard by the characters. Diegetic sound in a film is sound that can be heard by the characters. Scoring a film is a painstaking process involving a great number of people. It all starts with the composer, who then brings in the orchestra, the sound engineers, mixers, editors, and other folks whose tasks I do not completely understand. Even though the score is one of the most important pieces to a film's puzzle, it is often one of the last pieces to be added. I've heard film composers tell stories of seeing posters and advertisements for films that they are writing the score for, along with release dates, and they are not done writing the score yet, let alone recording it. Composers are often shown films by directors with temporary soundtracks, kind of Frankenstein from existing sources and even other films' soundtracks. This is done to have some sound behind the images while they're being worked on in the other phases of the production. But this sometimes proves difficult for the composers when directors become enamored with what's temporarily added and ask the composer, can you do something like that? In the early days of silent movies, orchestras played music sent with the film or improvised on their own if they didn't have the music for a specific film. Having live music accompany your movie in the theater on a regular basis must have been amazing back in the day. As I've mentioned before, Dakota and I were lucky enough to experience a live orchestra movie event a few years ago when we saw Jaws accompanied by a symphony orchestra. It's one of my all-time favorite movie experiences. It's goosebump stuff, great movie, great music, and we all know who wrote that music. More on him later. I have great respect for the men and women who provide the music that helps make our movie-going experiences so magical and unforgettable. My student film scores back at BU were just cuts from the Thief soundtrack, or other cuts by the band Tangerine Dream. Good enough for Michael Mann, that's good enough for me. We have 8 film composers lined up today. The first 4 are part of an honorable mention category before we get to what we're going to call Cinema Wellman's Mount Rushmore of film composers. Our 4 film composers in the extremely honorable mention category are Danny Elfman, Maurice Jarre, Franz Waxman, and Max Steiner. We'll begin with a composer you'll be familiar with if you enjoy the films of Sam Raimi or Tim Burton, or the music of Oingo Boingo. Danny Elfman, yes, he was the front man of Oingo Boingo, think Weird Science, before starting a very successful career as a film composer and some TV stuff. He wrote the theme from The Simpsons. He also had, he's married to Bridget Fonda? Wow, okay. To date, Elfman has 4 Oscar nominations for Milk, Big Fish, Men in Black, and Good Will Hunting. Elfman has 0 Oscar wins to date, but I am confident that this will change sooner rather than later. Before I mention other films scored by Elfman, I want to let you know that I'll be throwing out a lot of movie titles during this episode, and many of them are films that were considered all-time greats and classic cinema. This is not coincidental in any way, since each of those film scores were huge reasons why these films are so well regarded. Music really is that important in movies. So, here are some other Elfman-scored movies you may know and love. Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, Spy Kids, Silver Linings Playbook, and one of my favorites, Midnight Run. Releasing next month is Elfman's latest project, director Luc Besson's Dracula. I have a feeling that I'm going to be saying that. Next up is a film composer who was part of 8 films to be nominated for Best Picture, Maurice Jarre. French-born Maurice Jarre was a late bloomer who didn't become interested in music until he was in his late teens. Against his father's will, we hear that an awful lot in success stories. Come on, dads. He enrolled at a music conservatory. Jarre, as mentioned, was part of 8 films to be nominated for Best Picture. He also earned 9 Oscar nominations for his composing and 3 wins. His 3 wins were all epic films. He won for A Passage to India, Dr. Zhivago, and Lawrence of Arabia. Jarre also composed the music for Dead Poets Society, Fatal Attraction, Best Picture nominee Ghost, a favorite of mine, Judex, that I've talked about on the show before, and to prove that these film composers are as versatile as any actor, actress, or director out there, Top Secret. So the person who scored 5-time Oscar winner Dr. Zhivago also scored the Val Kilmer slapstick parody film Top Secret. And Omar Sharif was in both of those films. Jarre's final project before his passing in 2009 was a 2001 TV movie about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. Next up is a composer who worked with Billy Wilder 4 times and Alfred Hitchcock 4 times, so I'm sure he had some stories to tell, and that's Franz Waxman. Franz Waxman was born in 1906 in a part of Germany that is now part of Poland. You'll hear that again. He worked as a bank teller and paid for music lessons with his salary. If he worked with Wilder and Hitchcock so often, I'm sure it's fair to say that Mr. Waxman was a very patient man. He earned a whopping 12 Oscar nominations during his career and won twice for A Place in the Sun and the sensational Sunset Boulevard. Waxman also scored the classic horror film Bride of Frankenstein and one of my all-time favorites, Mr. Roberts. 2 of his collaborations with Hitchcock, Rebecca and Suspicion, were Best Picture nominees, while another, Rear Window, was not nominated for Best Picture. How on earth does that happen? Hitchcock gets a Best Director nomination, but the film gets snubbed for Best Picture. I'm not happy with that. Waxman's final film was also a TV movie about World War II, which may be a thing for retiring composers. Don't know. Our final composer in this extremely honorable mention category is a true workhorse in every sense of the word, and that's Max Steiner. Max Steiner was born in 1888 in Austria-Hungary, which is now just Austria. He was extremely musically gifted from a young age and even studied under Gustav Mahler, which is a name that even I recognize. In 1934, Max Steiner composed the music for 36 films. 36. And I'm thinking that his New Year's resolution at the end of 1934 was to not be so damn lazy and apply himself, since in 1935 he composed the music for 37 films. Steiner earned 24 Oscar nominations over the course of his prolific career and won 3 Oscars for Since You Went Away, The Informer, and now Voyager. Other classic Steiner-scored films include the OG King Kong, my dad's favorite movie, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Key Largo, and 2 of our all-time favorites, both of which were Best Picture nominees, Casablanca and The Caine Mutiny. Mr. Steiner's final project before his passing in 1971 was 1969's short family drama Hang Your Hat on the Wind, not Hang On to Your Hat, which was about a Navajo boy rescuing a horse. Now on to Cinema Wellman's Mount Rushmore of film composers. We will begin with a man who once said, and I quote, "You can't save a bad movie with a good score," end quote. Amen. And that composer was Ennio Morricone. 1928, and he passed in 2020. So Ennio Morricone was born in Rome, Italy in 1928. He died there 92 years later, refusing to ever move to Hollywood, and leaving us with some of the most memorable movie scores in film history. Morricone was a classmate of director Sergio Leone, and they went on to collaborate on 6 films, including The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Once Upon a Time in the West. He received 6 Oscar nominations: Days of Heaven, The Mission, The Untouchables, Bugsy, Milena, and The Hateful Eight. Morricone's only competitive Oscar was for The Hateful Eight, which is along the lines of Martin Scorsese's only Best Director win being for The Departed, and Paul Newman's only win for The Color of Money. He also won one of those honorary Oscars for his magnificent and multifaceted contributions to the art of film music before winning his legit Oscar, which is even more curious to me. Other films scored by the great Morricone include La Cage aux Folles, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, Bulworth, State of Grace, Cinema Paradiso, and of all things, Orca. One of the final projects Morricone worked on before his passing in 2020 was a short Western comedy titled The Good, the Bad, and the Hungry, which is about 3 New Yorkers having a standoff for who can get the last donut in a free donut box. Well done, my friend. Well done. Our next Mount Rushmore head belongs to a composer who is heavy on electronics and synth music and has scored some of the biggest blockbusters in recent history, and that's Hans Zimmer. West German-born Hans Zimmer is recognized as one of Hollywood's most innovative talents, and his innovation is one of the reasons the documentary about him is titled Hans Zimmer, Hollywood Rebel. Zimmer has earned 12 Oscar nominations to date. Rain Man, The Lion King, The Preacher's Wife, As Good as It Gets, The Thin Red Line, The Prince of Egypt, Gladiator, Sherlock Holmes, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Dune Part 1, and won 2 Oscars one for The Lion King and the other for Dune Part 1. He also scored True Romance, Crimson Tide, The Dark Knight, Blade Runner 2049, and F1, the movie. Hans Zimmer is completely self-taught, which is mind-blowing to me. I can't imagine how that would even work. Zimmer's older than me, but he's showing no signs of slowing down. He's working on the score for Dune Part 3 and has also scored this season of Euphoria and will score the upcoming Harry Potter TV series. He also composed the music for such diverse projects as Twister, we love Twister, Thelma and Louise, Backdraft, The Rock, The Simpsons movie, The Boss Baby, No Time to Die, which is a Bond movie, so The Boss Baby and a Bond movie, and a bunch of Kung Fu Panda movies. There is no question of how eclectic Zimmer's credits are. Next up is a composer who came out of dramatic radio, and it certainly shows. Bernard Herrmann. Bernard Herrmann once said, quote, "There's one rule to film composing, and that is there are no rules," end quote. Herrmann talked the talk and walked the walk on that statement, since he was responsible for some of the most daring film scores of all time by not following the standard rules that seemed to apply at the time. He was a major influence on Danny Elfman and earned 5 Oscar nominations during his career. Those 5 films were Citizen Kane, The Devil and Daniel Webster, Anna and the King of Siam, Taxi Driver, and Obsession. Herrmann's lone Oscar win was for The Devil and Daniel Webster, and I do not recall any of that music. He also scored Vertigo, North by Northwest, Cape Fear, and Psycho, and I remember a lot of that music, so the Academy muffs it once again. Alfred Hitchcock loved Herrmann's score for Psycho so much that he doubled his salary. Cha-ching! I mentioned earlier that Herrmann came out of dramatic radio, and one of the radio broadcasts he scored was Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast. You may have heard of that one. One of Herrmann's final projects was scoring the horror sequel It Lives Again, about an epidemic of monster babies sweeping across America. He was supposed to score Carrie, but died before post-production on the film began. And I like to think that Pino Donaggio, who did score Carrie, tipped the baton to Herman, since the music when Carrie is like looking around with that editing and that sound is a lot like the knife-wielding music in Psycho. And that leaves just one film composer left to talk about today, and that is the undeniable GOAT and official friend of Cinema Wellman, John Williams. There's no doubt that John Williams is the greatest composer in film history. When all is said and done, he may be considered one of the greatest composers in history, not just film history. Not sure why there's a difference, if a difference exists. Why can't John Williams be mentioned in the same sentence as Bach, Mozart, and Ludwig van? Not in the strict classical era sense, but Williams' music is just as recognizable at this point. To date, John Williams has earned 54 Oscar nominations, second only to that hack Walt Disney, who has 59 and deserved maybe 3 of them. I'm not going to list all 54 of Williams' films, but when I start reeling off his films, your head will be spinning. There are so many amazing accomplishments to mention that I'm just going to go old school list of bulleted facts. Here we go. Williams is the only person ever to be Oscar nominated in 7 consecutive decades. He played piano for Franz Waxman and Bernard Herrmann movie scores. He played piano on the film scores for The Apartment and West Side Story. He likes to use the term musical grammar, so I'm a big fan. 5 of his Oscar nominations are in the hated category of mine, Best Original Song, including the song from the terrible movie Yes, Giorgio. But he still needs to be recognized for that. His son Joseph is the lead singer of Toto. Did you know that? Toto. It's the lead singer of Toto. John Williams was awarded an AFI Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016. It's well-deserved and much more meaningful than one of those honorary Oscars that they toss around. He scored the holy trinity of disaster movies: The Poseidon Adventure, Earthquake, and The Towering Inferno. Williams scored JFK, Home Alone, The Patriot, favorite of mine, The Eiger Sanction, the thriller Black Sunday, all the Raiders of the Lost Ark, all of the Jurassic Parks, Saving Private Ryan, 3 of the Harry Potter movies, and he scored Stanley Kubrick's The Killers as Johnny Williams. I mentioned the 54 Oscar nominations, and I wanted to add that 5 wins came from those nominations, and the total could have been 5 times that, and no one would have peeped. Williams' 5 Oscar wins were for Fiddler on the Roof, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Schindler's List, Jaws, and Star Wars. Before Jaws, there was Gilligan's Island, 20 episodes. Before Star Wars, there was Lost in Space, 5 episodes. And he wrote that theme on a ukulele. John Williams has worked with directors Chris Columbus, Brian De Palma, Clint Eastwood, John Frankenheimer, Alfred Hitchcock, Ron Howard, Barry Levinson, George Lucas, George Miller, Alan Parker, Arthur Penn, Sidney Pollack, Don Siegel, Oliver Stone, William Wyler, and of course, Steven Spielberg. With the upcoming Spielberg film Disclosure Day, which Williams scored, Williams will have provided the music for 30 of Steven Spielberg's 35 films. So if you're a Steven Spielberg fan, you are a John Williams fan. Williams scored all of Spielberg's films except the TV film Duel, which is Jaws on the highway with a truck instead of the shark, The Color Purple, Bridge of Spies, Ready Player One, and the remake of West Side Story. Steven Spielberg once said of Johnny, as he calls him, "It's the purest form of art I've ever experienced from any human being." And that's good enough for us. Good enough for Spielberg, good enough for us. That's a wrap from here at Cinema Wellman. as we did our best to celebrate 8 of the greatest film composers of all time. Special thanks to Dakota, who suggested today's topic, making this kind of a request episode. I loved putting it together, and I'm happy to say that there are at least 3 more request episodes in the works for this season, and I have a FaceTime meeting about one of those right after we wrap this one. Chat, you can go home, but I got more work to do. If you ever have an idea that you'd like to see us explore here at Cinema Wellman, do not hesitate to let us know. We hope you join us again next time as we break down the top 10 and bottom 5 for the month of January. That's almost over. As of right now, that's a total of 28 movies, and yet not much is registered on either end, so that might be a shorty of an episode. So I won't take up too much of your time with that one, so you'll have, more time to work on those New Year's resolutions for 2026. And until then, take care.